about our future events. We'll make an effort to have more of them in South Bay, but we have a lot of them in San Francisco if you're ever up there. We also have our Slack team. Our Slack is open to all Latinx and allies in the area, and we have a South Bay channel so you can connect with other Latinx in the area. And if there's a company you want to work at, we have a jobs channel. We try to facilitate connections so that we can all get ahead. And we also have a Facebook for casual events and a LinkedIn for job posting. And if you have any friends in LA, we have a Google group and a group starting up there as well. I also want to point out our code of conduct. On our techqueria.org website, if you click on that link at the bottom for code of conduct, it is something that we take very seriously here at Techqueria. And if you have any issues, email us at organizers@techqueria.org or just discreetly contact one of us. Raise our hands again. And we'll make sure that we come to some resolution and we take it very seriously. And with that, I'm going to hand the microphone off to our wonderful sponsors who provided this amazing food and this great location for us. Udacity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, welcome to Udacity. We're happy to have you here. Hope you're enjoying the food and everything. We're very happy and want to thank Techqueria for letting us host this. This is the first time it happens in South Bay, and we're very proud that you've chosen us. So thank you. And yeah, let me tell you a bit about where you are, about Udacity. This is in Udacity. Our goal is to democratize education. Now that sounds simple, right? When I came here, when I heard democratizing education, I have an idea in my head, and I thought that was the idea. Then I came here and I started realizing there's a lot of democratizing education, right? Like, for example, if somebody can tell me, like, when I say democratizing education, what do you think? Like, what comes to your head? Making it available for everybody, right? Anything else? So that's what I had in mind, right? Like, but that also means a lot of things, right? It could be making available for everybody in the world if you don't have maybe the means, or if you're in a place that's not available for you. It's also like making it available throughout your entire life, right? Like maybe you had it available, but you're done with school. Like we believe that you should never stop learning, right? Either you're done with school, so everybody could also be people who don't have time, have kids or a job, or maybe they're already done, but they want to learn some more. People equate it sometimes with like changing jobs. You don't even need to change jobs. Like maybe you want to be in your job and enhance it, right? So there's a lot of dimensions in which you can democratize education, and we believe in all of them. So a little bit about the story. It started in 2011. Sebastian Thrun and Peter Norvig had a course in Stanford in AI, and they decided as an experiment to put it online, or just write it in a little piece of paper, and all of a sudden they had 160,000 students registered, and 23,000 of them graduated. And so they did is they made a final project, and they ranked the students in order together, the Stanford and the people in the world. And you want to guess the ranking of the first Stanford student in this class? 30 something, 25, higher. We got 30 something. We got 50, 200, 412. So when they saw that, they saw there's potential everywhere, and we really need to scale this education thing. So they founded this place. We have 5 million current registered students, whether in our paying nano degrees and our free courses. We have 8,000 of them have graduated. And I got my numbers here in my fact checking because I don't remember. Oh yes, weekly 200,000 weekly active students. And we have many programs. We have 2 main schools. One is the School of Web and the School of AI. We focus on like readiness for the job. We have nano degrees such as Android, programming, iOS, web development, back-end, front-end. And in the IA, we have machine learning, artificial intelligence, which is the one I work on, self-driving car, data science, many things. And we try to provide the community for the students. We try to so the students graduate with not just with a degree or a certificate, but also like a repository of projects that they can show in life, right? Just like an artist carries their portfolio, you carry your projects with data or your apps or anything. So yeah, that's what we live. I hope you check out our courses. And that being said, I'm going to hand it to Shashi, the moderator, to keep the show going. Thank you. And this is for you guys.
All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. I guess first, I just want to ask the panel to quickly introduce themselves and like where they work.
Hi, my name is Carlos Gomez. I work at Facebook. I've been there only a couple of months, but before that I spent 7 years at Netflix.
Hi, my name is Matthew Tamarios, and I'm the founder and CEO of Loom. Before that, I worked at Palantir and Microsoft.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Rodriguez and I work in diversity and inclusion at VMware, and before that I was at Yahoo and SAP.
Hi everyone, my name is Ruby. I'm the product manager of Atypica. Before that I co-founded a computer vision company, and before that I actually worked in healthcare.
Cool. So this panel, kind of the intention of the panel is to give advice for people who are more junior in their career, more entry level, and give them advice on how that they can set themselves up for senior positions. And so, you know, a lot of you are in really high positions at your respective companies or starting your own companies. So for a lot of people, that could be a little intimidating. So I guess my first question is, I want to ask you, what was your first job like? So that people can relate a little bit more.
My first job, actually it was with my mom. It was a summer and I wasn't even, I think, old enough to work, and she was working at a t-shirt factory. It was like, hey Miha, you want to make a couple of bucks during the summer? And I said yes, and then at the end of that summer I was like, Mom, I'm going back to school and I'm just gonna like work really hard, because that's the hardest job I think I've had in my entire life. No, it is the hardest job.
So I had my first job when I was 13, but I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. And my first job out of college, I actually started in the nonprofit sector, and I worked for First Five California as a case manager for families that needed help in Eastside San Jose. And I say that proudly because a lot of the skills that I gained from that first job I still use today. I did a lot of strength-based training. I worked a lot with families who were very vulnerable. And a lot of the skills that I used in working with those families, I still use today, with empathy and trying to find strengths in people who I'm working with. So I definitely did a transition. I accidentally fell into tech, but a lot of the skill sets that I learned from that case management job, I hold today.
Hey, so I guess I'll start with after college as well. And my first job was a program manager at Microsoft on Windows Core Operating System Security. And I was woefully unprepared for the working world. Most of my previous jobs had been help desk type roles, basically computer help desk in college. I might help my dad out with a help desk business before that. And what was really surprising about going into the workplace and actually, even though you're not directly managing folks, but actually having to work on a team of engineers and having zero preparation for that, was really a tremendous learning experience for me. And it always, even though I was always super passionate about technology, it really taught me that you can accomplish way more together as a team than as an individual. And that's one thing I've carried throughout my career.
My first job was selling fig jam in Mexico City on the street, and that was pretty fun. I would spend all the money on video games afterwards. The next real job I had was working for multiple teachers to, I guess, keep a fellowship of sorts I had in high school. And then that continued throughout college and graduate school. And after that, I did a bunch of different internships, and then I got a job at Google, then Netflix, and then Facebook.
So something that sort of came up in a couple of the answers here was soft skills and like team working. I think here in like Silicon Valley we have this like idea that, you know, it's all about like your technical skills, but can you some feedback? Can you tell us like what your perspective is with regards to like soft skills and like how that can help you move into a senior role?
I think for me, what played a really big part in the transition into first that computer vision startup and then this software program was just being consistently curious. Like when we started the computer vision company, didn't really know much about computer vision. I'd done most of the UX research, but it was just constantly like being aware of what you know and what you don't know, and then just being upfront about that and asking a lot of questions. And one of the things that I especially love about working with engineers is that more often than not, they're more than willing to like really explain. In fact, sometimes they'll go like overboard. They'll spend like whole 2 hours. Like one of my co-founders, we were on a flight of like 4 hours. Literally the whole time I just learned about how machine learning worked. And I was just like, tell me more, tell me more. So definitely being curious, knowing what you didn't know and what you don't know, and asking questions when you're curious about something.
I think for me, one of the most valuable things that I've discovered in my career is relationship building is as important as how hard you work. I was just talking with a couple students about that and how much that helped me. And when I was told over the years that you have to network and you have to put yourself out there and get to know people, I have never been one of those people that can work a room. You know, when I would hear networking night, I would just be like, that's not me, that's inauthentic to me. But I figured out that you have to figure out your own style of networking, whatever that may be. And I figured out that I'm really great at one-on-one coffee dates. I'm really good at connecting with people one-on-one, and I've just rolled with that for years. And it's helped me tremendously, externally, internally. When I get to know people better, obviously when I work with them on projects, it's just so much better. Externally, I found amazing mentors who have been able to help me in my own career growth and giving me my own advice. And so just putting myself out there and getting to know people has really just been huge for my career.
So for me, there's been 2 soft skills that have been really important, and one of them is actually learning to sell, something I've never been very comfortable with. But when you start your own company, you pretty much do that 24/7, starting from the VCs, who you have to sell on your idea, and also yourself, because that's what they're investing at the seed stage. And then as you find traction with customers, getting them bought into your product and presenting your product in a way that they can understand. And so that's been something that has been incredibly valuable to learn. And then it's like there's not a really good place to learn it. It's just sort of just jumping in off the deep end. Because I mean, you can read books about selling, but until you're actually trying to convince someone to write you a check for something, it doesn't really bring it home.
I think one aspect that took a little while to get used to is not shying away from having difficult conversations. Typically, you know, when you're working in a team, more complicated than machine learning or computers or any engineered system are humans. And I found that you really need to figure out what's the best way to interact with different individuals and with different teams. And that takes a long time to figure out. And mistakes are made and will be made throughout. So unless you have hard and direct conversations with clear feedback, where you seek the feedback, where you listen to feedback, and then react to it, you will run into situations where you will just not be able to be effective. I thought I would spend my whole life in academia doing research, and one of the reasons why I liked that idea was that in academia, you get to choose who your collaborators are. So if you don't like someone, you can just ignore them and, you know, we'll go work with 2 or 3 people that you really like. And you know, I think that's true, and it's pretty awesome. I still miss that part. But to be effective in a company with a larger team, that's where you can have the most impact. You cannot be like that, and you really have to learn to work well with everyone around you. That for me has been the biggest challenge.
So like networking was brought up. Like how important has networking been for each of your careers? And like how, do you have any advice on how to build up your network?
So I guess this goes back to that transition between healthcare and tech. If any of you guys were thinking about going to anything non-tech to tech, and just started going to events, and then at first it was really uncomfortable. Like I'd be at home, like, what am I gonna do? Who am I gonna talk to? Like I don't know anyone. And then after a while, I realized that by talking about what I'm curious about, it's almost like dating, right? Like speed dating. And then about what they're curious about, then you kind of just start naturally to ask more questions about what it is that they do. And then it was through one of these events, I was actually thinking about getting an MBA at that time, that I had met my mentor, who then later on asked me more about healthcare to go to a startup weekend, which is where she taught me about user experience research to work with it, and then we worked with engineers. And then after that, I just like really learned that that was what I was really passionate about entrepreneurship, building something new from scratch. And then later on, we started that company, also like talking to investors, like figuring out how to feel comfortable. Going out to networking events was really difficult at first, but after a while you kind of like realize that you're kind of building this pitch about yourself, so like 1 to 2 sentences about what you do. And then you build a conversation around that. And if you get some interest, if you don't, like usually you want to get some contact information, and later on go out for coffee to get to know them a little bit better. Because a lot of other people are also not comfortable in that setting. So just like basically just starting, I think it's the toughest part. But you guys being here, I think is a really good indication that you guys are a really good start. So definitely talk to as many people as you can. Get that contact information, go out for coffee, and then when you go out for coffee, ask, tell them what you're interested in, and more often than not, they'll know someone else that can get you towards that path that you're looking for.
I know I touched on this before, but just to add on to what I said, one of my goals in an ideal week is just to connect with somebody I don't know, whether that's lunch or coffee or whatever it may be, and just to get out there and put myself out there. The other thing that I was going to mention is a lot of my mentors have been found through networking, and I discovered that everybody loves to talk about themselves. Everybody has a story, and when I've reached out to maybe somebody who's 2 levels up from me or some type of executive, I have kind of put myself out there like, I do want to learn from you, I want to know how you got to where you're at. And I discovered those conversations are obviously a little different than conversations you would have with your friend or your peers at the same level. They're a lot more pointed, they're a lot more direct with you, like what is it that you want out of your career? What do you want to do? That's not specific enough. And I sort of found myself like, okay, this is sort of where I need to kind of have my vision for what I want to do. And so those conversations with people higher up from you are just as important as well.
Oh, can I have a quick follow-up? When you're reaching out to those people who are like a couple levels above you, are you doing that within the company you work for, or like across your broader network? Like, what does that look like?
I would say both. And honestly, there have been times when, like, at events, I meet people or I reach out to a speaker afterwards, or I just connect with them there and just do like a personal follow-up. And most of the time, it's pretty positive. Most of the time, people definitely want to connect. And I think, everyone wants to network, and so it's just a natural thing that people are open to.
So I wanna echo the one following up with on like coffee or a follow-up meeting is always a really good idea, and I've also found it really helpful having a mentor, more so for me in the company I'm in, both for one, learning to navigate the waters, and also having someone who's not your lead who will champion you inside of the company. So. Not having had that when I first started Microsoft, one of the struggles was I didn't know the norms for how to operate as a PM, and so for the first like year or two, I kind of found them out the hard way by trial and error, and then I was really lucky to find a guy that would skip level, a GPM level, who actually, for some reason, he took interest in me and actually coached me. And we're still friends to this day. So those relationships are really valuable. And one thing I want to add about building up on your network, it's really important to find your tribe, because those are going to be the people that are going to support you. So beyond just meeting new people, identify a set of people that you cultivate because they're going to be the people that you call when you need help. They're going to be the people that you call when you need a job. They're going to be the people that you call when you need advice. And having that additional filter and established relationships so you don't have to like explain everything. They already have some idea of how you think and how you operate in a shared set of values. Can be really helpful in all kinds of challenges that you experience throughout your career.
I have been super lucky to not have to deliberately build a network. I have just pursued things that I'm interested in and naturally seeked out people that I wanted to have stronger connections with, coupled with changing areas completely every few years, just based on my own interests, not based on anything else. Over time, my network grew based on those stronger connections I made in the different places that I stayed at. So I've actually never actively seeked out to build a network in any event that I would go to. It's because I was interested in the topic. So as an example, if I become interested in a particular area of mathematics, and I'll just try to find the best conference in the area, I'll go and I'll talk to people there, not really to network, but because I'm interested in the actual topics. That's happened to even meeting people to do mountain biking or to make wine and so on, and then somehow you find out that you have other common interests and they become part of your network, but again, without thinking explicitly about it. So I think part of it is also luck, I suppose.
So in kind of like planning out your career path and like your next move, there's different areas to invest in to like round yourself out as a candidate, like whether it's like doing the job you have now really well or learning a new like skill or networking or something. Like how do you think about your career in terms of that, or is there an area you particularly invest in like over the others?
I think it's a very good question. In my case, when I finished school, my then girlfriend, now wife, and I found out that we were pregnant, and we both owed a bunch of money to the schools that we went to. So we were really thinking about how to get a job that pays on money. And that was really the driver for my career choices. It was basically roughly where would I like to live, and then how can I pay the bills. After that, and that's basically why I left academia. I think otherwise I would probably be a professor at this point somewhere, or a researcher somewhere. Then after that, I just sort of like became bored and was seeking out other things to do that would seem more fun, to always remain, intellectually engaged and motivated to want to do the job you want to do. I found that when you are doing that, when you are getting up every morning really wanting to go to work and to spend the time doing what you're doing and with a group of people that you'll see every day, that's when the rest happens. That's when career progression really happens. Otherwise, I find that a lot of people are shy to change. As an example, I didn't like my experience at Google. I was pretty bored. I was working in the search algorithm. I like math, I like algorithms. And by the time I got there, it was in a fairly mature state, and the company there for search was fairly risk averse. And I didn't want to spend my time working on very, very small tweaks. So after 6 or 7 months, I decided I should leave. But all my friends and my family told me, wow, you're crazy. You have a son, you're still paying your loans, you don't have a bunch of money. Why don't you stay there? Everyone says that it's the best place to work at the time. I decided to take a job at Netflix, which was then a fairly small company, definitely a lot less regarded than Google. But it turns out that by making the change, I landed in a place where the culture was a much better fit for me, in a place that was not risk-averse at all, but they were pretty hungry for people to try out completely different ideas. And I just had a ton of fun, and then also a lot of impact because of it. Then after 7 years, I got a bit bored with the mission. It started to not mean as much to me. So I started to look for something else, and now I'm at Facebook, and we'll see how that goes. But the point is, at least for me, I think what has helped has been enough randomness, shifting from company to company quite a bit, and even from area to area quite a bit. I did biology research, I did some healthcare, I've done some statistics, I did search, then recommendations without knowing anything about all of that. But again, just sort of like following my interests. But I don't know. I suppose that can also work out pretty badly. So a lot of it is luck. But
So I think especially on the tech side of things, actually always working on stuff that you're passionate about is always going to be better. It's going to be easier for you to perform at your max. But what I found out in some of the more softer skill focus areas, so when I was a PM at Microsoft, and even when I was a forward deployed software engineer at Palantir, which is basically a PM that codes, it's a big part of your success ends up actually learning how to navigate your organization for career progression. And so I think, and it looks very, very different in like and when the metric for success is a little bit more ambiguous than when it's like there's a bunch of hard technical problems and they're super interesting and you go after and solving them, because it's there's no objective metric of how successful you are. Occasionally there's money in how many contracts you close, but really when you're maintaining a customer relationship or multiple customer relationships or designing a UI for 1 billion people, and there's going to be no feedback loop there for being like, oh yeah, this UI was like super great and it was like 25% better than the alternate designs that you considered. So a big part is learning to basically evangelize yourself and the accomplishments and how to phrase them, and also how to manage up, which ends up being very important to be 100% in line with your manager in those type of roles. So those are things that I have found really impacted career progression, and being aware of them and how to operate in each organization. It varies. You kind of have to figure it out. But that's for the more softer skilled side of things.
I think for me, there comes a point in your career when you realize what makes you click, what situation makes you thrive. And I think it's easier for you to reflect on it looking back than discovering it looking forward. And for me, I have realized that I get a lot of joy building new initiatives related to people and inclusion and diversity. And now I can say, you know, like let's say at VMware and my other companies, I've started initiatives that weren't there before that really impacted enterprise-wide. And that brings me a lot of joy, and I've realized that that is essentially part of my brand now. That being said, I now have a vision of, you know, what makes me happy and what makes me click for the future. At the same time, I know that lifelong learning is really important. So even though I know what makes me happy and what I look for now in a career, I know that I have to keep up to date, and I need to know the latest research, and I need to push myself to learn the latest things, because you have to constantly develop yourself to remain fresh and remain on top of your game. So I think those are two things I'm constantly developing out.
I guess kind of just to reiterate on what you guys said, for me, I think, at least personally, it's always passion and what am I interested in learning now. I feel like when I stop learning is when I get really bored, and that's when you don't want me to work at your company anymore. So let's see what would be, like a good example would be now that I'm project managing, and then I work with like engineers on the front end, the back end, and the designer. I really wanted to learn more about the how. Before this, I was more like top level, like just like what is the user experience, what do customers want, what do the investors want, how do you move forward on that end? And I was really interested in like, well, how is it that it's being built? What does the architecture look like? And how does that, at the end of the day, affect the actual customer at the end of the process? So I took like a 1-month hardcore intro to JavaScript, which it turns out I really loved. So I think that's what really keeps me driven, is just continuing to move forward, becoming passionate in something new, learning that, trying to become better at it, but also keeping everything else sort of there in my mind. So continuously learning, but also grabbing back to other things that you've learned, and then building everything together on top of the people skills, which I think I'm also continuously learning. And I definitely agree with like being upfront about things is kind of hard at first, like saying like, hey, like I don't like the way that you responded to this, but being upfront about that first it's always better because you engage the other person into that conversation, as opposed to like later on somebody blowing up for something that either of you didn't think about talking to each other about. So it's a little bit of everything.
So Michelle, so you work in working on increasing the diversity and inclusion of your company, VMware. Can you talk a bit about issues that you see affecting specifically the Latinx community and things that employees can do to like, help themselves?
So I feel like specific to our Latinx community, we are super diverse. And I think that is one of the most beautiful and also one of the most toughest things for our community, because we come from so many different cultures and countries and languages and customs. And one of the greatest things that I learned actually was from Laura, from Atípica. And she talked about how when you talk about Latinx people in the US, it's really important to localize, because a Latinx person in Miami is totally different than a Latinx person in Chicago than San Francisco. So it's really hard to generalize this. That being said, I think there are a couple things that research tells us that specifically affects Latinos in tech and specifically in corporate. One of those is the fact that we have a really hard time with uncovering who we are. And uncovering is sort of the research term for making sure that you bring your whole self to work. So not covering up maybe your bilingualism, or maybe something that's happening at home that may be affecting your productivity, or maybe you're covering up some experiences you may have because you feel like it doesn't fit with the culture of your organization. So there are certain things that cause actual real productivity loss for companies, specifically when it comes to Latinos. When you don't uncover and when you don't bring your whole self to work, there's a lot of research that shows that you are less loyal to your company, you're less happier at work, and you don't innovate as hard. So it's really important for us to be okay with who we are and bringing that forward. That being said, I know it's easier said than done, but those are just a couple of trends in the community.
Does anybody want to add to that, or maybe talk about if you've ever experienced like imposter syndrome about being in tech or anything like that? Or has that not been an issue?
I don't think that has been an issue for me, but I can imagine that. Let's say in all the companies I've been to, there's been very few Latinos. Although I do know many other Latinos in technology who are very successful. I'm sure many of you are here too. But I imagine that it must be very hard for other groups to, at the extreme. So as an example, Netflix, a culture that I really love, we have very few Muslim people. I see some more I saw some more at Google, and I see some more at Facebook. But given the way the culture works, I can imagine that being Muslim, I have several Muslim friends. It must be very hard to be productive when you have to stop and pray at multiple times in the day and so on. There's just not the setup to make that happen. I think us Latinos have the advantage that we naturally get along with diversity of people. In fact, that may be a disadvantage in some sense when I look at other ethnic groups. I think they have stronger ties to each other, and they have more of a sense of, identity or maybe even nationalism, and that they have to help each other. What I observe from Latinos is that we like most people so much that we don't see a need to sort of like help each other particularly. And especially with what's going on in this country, that may have to change if we want our people to do well and to push for a more inclusive country and a more inclusive world. I don't know. Those are the thoughts that came to mind. Well, maybe I'll say one more thing. I guess one thing I have seen in Latinos is maybe that we tend to limit ourselves too much. So instead of choosing what we want to do, trying it out, and then letting the world tell us that, for whatever reason, we cannot do it, in many cases, inside of our heads, we tell ourselves, no, we won't be able to do that for X or for Y. So another thing that I found pretty helpful is to completely let go of that, and then the hard part should be figuring out what you want to do, And then after that, it's really not your problem, it's the world's problem to tell you whether you can do it or not, but just go for it.
I think like a lot of people not only limit themselves, but their family also can limit them. Like, you know, get the stable job instead of the risky job, right?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things I'd like to mention. One is along the lines of family. There's one of the things that, even though my parents were, I feel, relatively well off, and my dad was actually in tech, he came over from Colombia when he was 13, and he went to school, and he almost didn't even go to school, even though he got into Brown and George Washington University. He was signing up for the military because they didn't have money to pay for it. So he luckily got saved from that outcome. But when he was advising me on like how to apply to school, it was very, very different. And what I found is that like I am now infinitely more prepared when I have kids to provide better guidance. And so having that's where I think like mentorship and helping other Latinos can be really important, because I've like met people who don't even know the opportunities that are available to them and what they can do. So and that also, the second thing was about helping like elevating each other. I think that's been like a big issue. And one of the things that I've noticed is, and especially at the VC level, you often get pushed towards working in companies where it's like, oh, you should go work on something that helps underrepresented minorities, which is great, but you're basically locking yourself out from these opportunities where you can have a much broader impact. Like if we want to have a Latino Mark Zuckerberg, it's not gonna, unfortunately, it's not going to happen if you're doing work for the little P. Like you need like the big P with which is large markets. And so it doesn't sound nice to say that, but if we actually want to make that breakthrough and set up a self-sustaining system, we're going to have some outcomes for people like that.
I was just going to touch on the family bit that you brought up. I think, so I'm first generation, so I'm a child of immigrants. And I'm going to be super real for a second and say that I think for us, it can be very difficult at times because we can find ourselves as sort of a sandwich generation where we're taking care maybe of younger ones, and then we're also taking care of parents that maybe don't have a 401k like we do. We may be faced in a situation where, you're making more than both of your parents ever did combined, and maybe we don't have that financial knowledge or that financial, cultural capital to understand how to invest or how to manage that money. And so one thing that I learned was to outsource and not pretend to do it on my own. Even if you don't have a lot of money now, go to a financial advisor, figure it out, go to an expert who can help you out, it can help you plan. Because if you are in a situation where you are maybe the safety net for your parents or for your extended family, I think you need to plan now. And it's not to be scary, it's just to be real. I think it's for a lot of us something that we face as first generation. So I just want to put that out there.
I think as another first generation, one of the hardest things I think for me, my parents have never really known what I do ever since I graduated high school. And then kind of just being comfortable with that. And like, even when I quit my job to this startup, I don't know if you got the same thing, but they were like, hey, you have like a stable job. You've been there for like, what, only 2 years? You like should be there for like 15 years. And I'm like, what? So like being okay with your family, like obviously like try to explain it to them, but just be okay with your own path. And sometimes it could be hard, like even within your own family members, like cousins might also not understand. But I think one of you guys, I think you mentioned like finding your tribe. I think that was what was really important for me. Finding other people that are willing to help you out. Like one of the biggest things that I realized was that when I came to tech, the people from different Latino cultures were a lot different than in healthcare. In healthcare, everyone's kind of like very cutthroat. I'm not trying to help you kind of thing. Like I'm trying to shine and maybe like put you down. And when I came to tech, everyone's trying to pull each other up. And I thought that was really awesome, very collaborative. And I'm sure there are other people in healthcare that are also like that. So definitely try to find your tribe. And then they might work in places where they're happy and they have those kinds of cultures that you're looking for.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. But I guess I just, the last thing I wanted to ask was about, there's a big push for diversity hiring right now, like across the industry and in the press and things like that. But do you ever see any like kind of like blowback against that, where like people say like, oh, you're a diversity hire, like, do you get the same level of respect, or is that not an issue for you? Is that something that just you're able to roll with?
I haven't really had that issue yet.
Oh, if, for those who don't know, can you explain Atypica for people?
Oh yeah, so Atypica is what we do is
Or the background of it, like with
background?
Laura.
Okay, so the background with Laura. So we met each other while we were both starting our own companies, and I really love the mission that she was working on, which is using natural language processing to look at resumes, de-identify the people that had applied so that recruiters can get the best applicants that are out there without having to risk unconscious bias. And so on top of that, we're now working on analytics and showing recruiters how they can improve their hiring funnel as well. And what I really love about that company is our diversity hire was actually a white male. I thought that was pretty funny. We were kind of like sitting down and I was like, oh, like this guy's like coming on board. I'm like, hey, that's like our diversity hire. And what that made me think was, diversity is not just like non-white people or white males. Like it could mean different things for different communities. And so for us, I was thinking like, hey, like eventually we should be really dynamic, because maybe in the future when, there are more Latinos with their own companies, then maybe the diversity hire will also be a white male in those companies. So it really made me think about diversity in a broader perspective. Is that kind of it?
So I haven't been told that directly, but I have heard that term a lot, especially in the work that I do. I think that, and the phrase I'm referring to is when people say lowering the bar for diversity hires or something like that. And it kills me every time I hear it because I feel like it's such a biased statement with such racist undertones. I absolutely hate it when people say that because it's setting a certain set of people as the norm. That being said, I do feel like I did hit a lot of imposter syndrome at some point when I was advancing, and I actually worked with an executive coach to overcome a lot of that imposter syndrome and figure out techniques to combat it. And on top of that, I do feel like once you become so good that you become invaluable, it really doesn't matter. And people won't look at you like that once they see the result of your work and they see the impact that you're making on the organization. So it may be something, really, if it does hit you hard, it may be something that's just at the beginning. But if you're that great and you love it and you can make the work shine, then it all dissipates.
Yeah, I'd like to second that is once you prove yourself, it's no longer as big of an issue. And I really, the way I view it is, even if you accept the premise, you should still take it and then just go and shine and just really just blow everybody away. You already have, there's so many disadvantages, and I wish, I'm totally butchering somebody's quote, but it's like you have so many disadvantages when you're just getting in the door that like having some small advantage is like, just own it and then just do amazing work, and then you can change people's mind. I know personally my experience at like Palantir, and actually throughout all my entire life has always been like initially people don't know how to feel about you because they're, like, especially for me, I mean, like people, I'm kind of a big guy, kind of goofy, and but usually within like a week or two, people either working with me or on a day-to-day basis, they figure out what I'm all about. And usually the problem, there's always going to be problem people, and you can figure out who they are very quickly. But generally speaking, the majority of the time, everything ends up working itself out as long as you demonstrate value.
I think tech's a great place because it's very meritocratic, especially compared to most of these industries that I know. So the advantage there is that, regardless of how big of a factor diversity played in getting you into the door, it's really something I have never thought about for myself anyway. But once you're there, if you're doing great work, people will notice, and they don't really care, who you are otherwise, as long as you're having an impact and being successful with your broader team. I guess the only time when the concept of diversity was brought up to me was actually in the context of academia, where one of my advisors suggested at the end of my PhD, when I was applying to faculty positions, most people in my field anyway were applying to faculty positions after a postdoc, and I did not want to do a postdoc for a variety of reasons. And he said, he's a super nice guy, by the way, I really respect him, and he's been a great mentor, but in this one case he said, you know what, why don't you apply for a green card, and then you can apply as a diversity candidate, because once you do that, you'll for sure get a position. My immediate reaction was like, no, fuck that. If that's what will happen, then I will never apply as a green card holder. And I didn't.
All right, let's get some audience questions. We've got one up here, and then Carlos after that. Is it on?
I've never used the cube before.
Oh, it's on. Yeah, it's working.
Oh, you can hear. Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Jacqueline. I work at Reputation.com as a junior data scientist in the data science department over there. So I was going through my notebook as you said Q&A time, because I was trying to look for these notes that I had taken the other day when I was asking my boss some questions about some more challenging projects that I would like to take on, because I am entry level still. I got hired after being an intern at the company, and they wanted me to stay on, so that's how I got hired. And the reason I was trying to find them is because they were kind of funny. Like, they were basically like my complaints about my boss that I couldn't say out loud, so I was like, I'm just going to write them down. I'm just going to write them down, and I'm going to figure out how to say them respectfully later. Because right now, my diction is not very respectful. But anyway, so my question to you guys is, I am doing a Udacity class right now, actually, in data analytics, and the reason I decided to take the class is because I felt like, I'm sure there are some things that I might need to brush up on if I ever want to get a promotion to get to mid-level data scientist or senior level data scientist one day. So that's how I started the Udacity class. And when I finished my portfolio at the end of it, what is the appropriate way or the best way to present that portfolio to my boss so that he will give me more challenging projects on my team, so that I can show him that I can do some of the more upper level projects?
I think you should just be direct. Hopefully your boss has a regular one-on-one with you. And once you feel like you know different set of techniques that you think he or she is not aware of, you should just be completely upfront and direct and say, hey, I just want you to know that I've been spending a bunch of time learning about these new techniques, and I think they can be helpful in several situations. It would be even better if you can identify already some situations from your work, from the context you have about what's going on in your company and in your team, to apply those new techniques, and then ask him or her for some time to try it out. If they say no, then one strategy, that would already send a pretty negative signal about your team, and I would think about possibly changing manager or teams. But if they say no, you can still try it out on your own, basically. So try to come up with your own problem that's relevant to your work, apply those new skills that you've learned, and then go back to maybe initially your broader team, maybe a peer, then later to your boss, and present the results and propose having you spend more time on related projects.
What he said, the one delta I would make is enter into action with boldness and ask for forgiveness, not permission. So I would identify something where you can apply these skills immediately. Maybe it's some project that maybe hasn't gotten the love that it shouldn't have, and then explain it, your work in the context of adding value to the company and how you're adding more value at a higher level. and take that tact. Saying like, hey, I want to do that may work, but I really think if you really want to go for it, you might as well just go and do it, because you'll get the benefit of A, doing it, and B, if you can actually show them like, here are the results, here's what I did, and you still don't get a positive response, you immediately know that it's like time to move on. Like there's no question about it.
That adds the element of surprise to it, which I like. Delight them.
Hey guys, well, first of all, thanks for setting this up, Techqueria, and thanks for all the advice, guys, up here in the panel. My question to you guys is, you mentioned that to get a job or to go to the next level, you come in with the idea of, I want to learn something new, right? I have a really good relationship with my VP, and I can imagine that conversation if I go in and I tell him, look, I want to learn something, that's why you need to give me the job. Really hard sell, right? And all of you guys said, I want to move into the next job, I want to learn something new. So how do you sell yourself to that next job without coming in and saying, I want to learn something new? Because an experienced hiring manager is not going to hire you to come in and learn. They're going to hire you to come in and do the job. You know what I mean?
So the first thing I'd say is, that may be true of experienced hiring managers, but if you are, this is again partially luck, a good hiring manager will hire for slope, not intercept. And what that means is if you are growing quickly and you're constantly demonstrating that you're learning and taking on new challenges, it's much easier to be like, look at my slope, and if you plot this out, I will be here when I take on this role. A bad hiring manager, or maybe a less experienced one, may not have that same philosophy, so that can be more challenging. And then in that case, it might just be a matter of figuring out like what they're looking for and how to like check off the check boxes for that to convince the person. But I think mostly if you're in a good company, demonstrating your slope will get you the opportunities.
Just to piggyback on that, and totally agree with everything you just said, and another tactic I've used is start doing the side projects that will relate to the role that you want. So even if it's not the role that you have right now, figure out, okay, what is it that I need to get to that? And where can I volunteer my time as, you know, I will volunteer that project, or I will do this initiative, or I will start this new thing. And then you promote the hell out of that when you are trying to get to that next level and say, I built this, I demonstrated that, and that sort of goes into the whole slope conversation of, I have the skill set, I've already demonstrated that I've been able to do something like this here, and so that's sort of something that I've been able to do.
I think, yeah, go ahead. Something else that's really helped, for me at least, is finding applicable skills that you've done that can be transferred onto the new skills that you're going to do. So when I first graduated out of college, I found this project management job at the, what was it? Forgot the name of the company. It was this healthcare company, and they required a master's in public health, which I didn't have. And I was like, well, I really love this position. I'd be working really close to the COO, so I'd be able to learn a lot about how their business works, and that was really exciting to me. So when I went, he was like, hey, well, like, you don't have a master's. And so before that, I just got really prepared, and I looked at what you learn through a master's, and I looked at all of my classes that I had taken. And so I just built him this whole story about how I learned a lot of those things that you would learn going to get your MPH, and the other internships that I had, and how those skills were applicable to that job. And luckily, he's like a very scrappy guy, so he was like, wow, I love that you like did all that research, and you looked into the job description, into the company enough to care. And it was just that passion. I was like, hey, well, like, just, you know, give me the job and give me like 3 months. If I suck, just fire me. And yeah, so that was what really helped. And I think it's also helped in the future, definitely doing like side projects as well when I want to learn something. Like for management skills, it'd be like volunteering, right? And then managing people, and then you can use that word manage. And these are the situations that I had to work with that were tough, and this is how they're going to translate into the next role.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Got a question back there.
you mind if I pass it?
You could throw it. Yeah, you could throw those.
Hello? Hello. Okay. So my name is Tuan. I have a question regarding organization politics. So as you advance through your career, you probably experience politics in the sense of, negative, unhealthy competition, either among your peers or your, some management. So how do you deal with that? And are you, avoiding that, or what's your opinion?
I would try to say to stay above it if you can. I think we all sort of have to navigate politics somehow. One of my mentors tells me that the air is thinner at the top. So the more you work with the top and the more you work at the executive level, it's a little harder to breathe. That being said, I also believe that everything that you do, if you do it in line with your integrity and your values, you really can't go wrong. But with navigating politics, something that has helped me, and I guess the good part of it is when I have had colleagues that are in different areas of the business, so just, in the context of a large company, getting perspective from outside of my silo and my organization is really helpful, because then you get the perspective of the whole organization, or things that may be coming up on the horizon that people in your org don't know about, but maybe would be helpful for you to understand context-wise. But other than sort of gaining access to that information, I would say just don't play into petty gossip, or just try to stay above that and stick to your work.
So I had the pleasure of working at Microsoft during the Ballmer era. If you've ever seen that XKCD comic where all the the different org charts, and the Microsoft org chart is just a bunch of guns pointing at each other, that's exactly what it was like. So sometimes you just can't avoid politics, and a full explanation of everything that you can do would take forever. But my short version of it is you have to be aware of your audience whenever you are communicating, and that is a skill that you only build up over time. And it actually ends up being a valuable skill, not just for handling organizational politics, but also even on a customer call. If you have multiple different partners on that call, everybody has their own interests and set of agendas, and you need to basically have a plan for addressing it. And it's impossible to come up with a general plan, but it's usually good preparation to be aware of the people who you have the most contact with, and have sort of an idea of what their agenda is. Is he angling for this promotion? Is he trying to get this project? Because that way you have that context when you're evaluating what decisions, or how they're making their decisions, and how you should react. And it's just something you pick up by living through it, but it sticks with you afterwards for a real long time.
I'll add that a lot of it has to do with the company culture, and to the extent that you can just go to a place that doesn't have a lot of politics. As an example, one of the things that in my view adds a lot of politics and makes the situation seem like a zero-sum game instead of win-win, where everyone does better if the team works better, is having ladders and having a system that will only promote people within a certain percentile of whatever bullshit scoring system you have. So that's one advantage, I think, of many startups, where they try to use common sense, assuming they do have common sense, to just evaluate people and give them more opportunities. Ladders are one reason why I really don't like larger companies, and even though it may be part of my job sometimes, I guess it will be at Facebook to some extent, it's something that really annoys the hell out of me. Another suggestion is to stay above politics. Never say anything about anyone that you wouldn't say to their face. It goes, again, with being willing to have the harder conversations. Again, if some person is being an asshole for whatever reason, you should try to tell them directly. And then if you need to tell other people around them, but in a way that's, again, not political, because it's completely direct, and you should focus on how do we create an environment that will make the dynamics win-win for everyone, where we are aligned on having the same goals and achieving the same goals. And again, to the extent that that's not there, it needs discussion with everyone involved, with the manager. And if the atmosphere doesn't change, again, just go elsewhere. If you can, I guess.
Okay, you had a question?
Yeah. I don't have a question. I have a comment. I'd like to address what you asked about when people say, oh, you're the diversity hire, and somehow that's lowering the bar. I think we all have to own the fact that when there's greater diversity in a company or an organization, the organization and the company does better and sells more. So we aren't just a diversity hire. We're an increased sales and increased revenue hire. We are here to do better. And as soon as we own that, we can kill back some of the imposter syndrome that might be hiding in our little souls and help other people to understand that better. Because we were hired because we're fabulous, not just because we're brown or purple polka dot.
All right, any other questions? Toss it.
So, with the low representation of Latinos or Hispanics in tech, have you ever received any pushback in your career? Meaning, like, because if you had initiatives to increase diversity, or hey, you notice you're the only brown person in the room or at the table, how has that made you? Well, I guess everyone would be sad and frustrated and angry, but like, what have you done to try to increase diversity besides coming to events like this?
So I had an experience once, and this was actually with a Stanford student who wrote for, I think, whatever the Stanford Review is, whatever the conservative paper is, and they basically they sort of challenged me with like, hey, so and so Peter Thiel said at some point that having diversity in your initial team is bad. You should have a homogenous team. Everyone should be the same, so you don't waste time with that. And that's very unexpected to come up in a normal conversation. But I think it's one way you can fight that is hire a diverse team and be successful. And that's the simplest way. Is you just find ways to just demonstrate by example, because you're not going to be able to argue with someone who's already starting from that premise, that like, oh, any differences are actually going to hold you back. You're not going to convince them that it's actually going to make you more powerful unless you prove them you demonstrate through example that you can sell more, you can build faster, and you can better serve people's needs. That's winning by example is the most powerful statement that you can make.
I think the second thing is like, so you can win by example, but if like you're a douchebag about it, for example, they're gonna hate you even more, right? You're the really successful douchebag. So what's also really good, it's like, you know, get people, can't say like necessarily like to like you if like they're, you know, bad people, but like try to get to know them, right? What are their backgrounds? And like one of the things that's really worked for me is like trying to get to the end of why it is that they think the way they do, and then you'll realize like, oh, like this is the reason why they think the way they do, and then they're like, oh wow, this person's actually like pretty cool. So like one example was an organization was like 95% Chinese, and I was actually the only brown person there. And so a lot of them were like, hey, kind of like in the hallways, like, what are you doing here? Like, okay, this is weird. And then I was, as a project manager, they didn't like project managers because they never like really asked questions. They were just kind of like, do this, do that, without really understanding the operations and workflows of the clinic or the different departments that we had. And so one thing that really helped was just talking to everyone and like really listening them out. And it's like, okay, well, this is the initiative that we have. And then after a while, they realized that I would listen, because I knew only if I listened would I be able to like tweak that operation to make it better and not worse for them. And then I would understand what they knew and what they didn't know. And then little by little, like trying to get to know them, by the end, everyone was really awesome. And so I think that was something that really helped. Like I sensed a little bit of animosity at first, but by really trying to get to know them, and maybe sometimes you kind of do have to push through, they will then realize like, hey, you're an awesome person, and maybe as a population, like, you know, other people could be good too. and they just might not have had that experience before.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah. So to Carlos's point, so I'm a software engineer, and my parents were field workers, so I didn't really have examples in tech. But to Carlos's point, I love that tech is like, if you do really good work, they promote you. But like Matthew said, when I first came in, mostly all my coworkers were either white or Indian, and I felt like they couldn't. I felt they were treating me like more differently because they couldn't place me. And I hear the recurring theme is, you know, do a lot of hard work and eventually it'll show. And I've gotten promoted twice, so that's really good. I think that's coming through. But I feel like this year I've had to be a lot more forceful with teams and saying, you know, this decision I think is the right decision instead of just letting the work play out all the time. So I know we say kind of just keep working and working and working, and we have to prove ourselves. It kind of just seems like we have to prove ourselves. But like at one point is like confidence and coming through and just saying, you know, I think this is the right decision, or do you kind of just keep waiting and saying, well, eventually my work will like shine through? Like, what's the balance for that for you guys?
So I mentioned this in the beginning. I think that hard work is just as important as how you show up and how you network and how you promote yourself. And I think that as a culture, culturally speaking, it's sort of the antithesis of how we grow up when we're told to be humilde and we're told, you know, just put your head down and work hard and things will happen. I don't think that that's the reality of the tech world and the corporate world, at least not in my experience. I do think that we need to learn to own our stuff and to promote it and speak up in meetings. I think that our presence is very powerful in meetings, and understanding that body language is powerful, being direct and communicating is powerful. So I definitely don't agree that you get promoted by just working hard. I think that's totally wrong. I think that's really important to communicate and build those allies across the organization that can later on sponsor you and say, yeah, they work hard and they can lead an initiative and they're really good at project managing and I like to work with them and they're really good and I know they'd be good there too. So unless you have those people behind closed doors fighting for you when those hiring decisions or those promotion decisions are happening, you're just going to continue working hard and being a workhorse, in my opinion.
One word I like is impact. So trying to optimize for the impact you have, and that not only means, say, on how much code you write and what code you write, but more generally on the team around you. Are you someone that people want to work with? And after they work with you, they want to work with you again because you contribute not only with the code you write, but more generally to the team dynamic and overall to come up with the high-level plan that is being executed, and you are identifying problems that will come up and can take action to correct them and so on. And the other point is that I think if you have a lot of impact, ideally your salary will grow. If you're doing the same function, you can continue doing it at a higher level. If you're in a system with ladders, that may mean climbing some steps in the ladder, but ideally it means again your salary growing. If you are really seeking to change the job you have for a different one, then I think you have to be very strategic about it. And like people here were saying before, identify the skills of that other job and find out what the difference is between the job you have and the skills that are needed for the other job. And then be strategic about how to get experience in those other skills. If you're surrounded by a supportive team, they will enable you to acquire those skills. If you're not, then you need to find a way to get them outside of work, either maybe by finding a pet project to work on or taking a class or whatever it is, and then potentially interviewing somewhere else. I do think that to the extent that you're convinced that you can do better work, much better work than the one you're doing, and you're not set up to get that where you are, there's so many opportunities in the Bay Area. You're in the best place to just talk to many other companies and find another environment where you can develop those skills and go for that job that you want.
Okay, I think that's wraps up the panel. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time and providing such great insight. So I see a lot of new faces, and the next part of the meetup is probably the most important, which is the networking. So mix and mingle, meet somebody new, make some connections, set up some coffees for next week. Grow your network and your career.
Thank you.